And everybody should be coming in to join us. It is that time, which is, well, 11 o'clock my time out here in the Pacific, but 2 o'clock for Eastern time. And this is our third panel, Research versus Experience, Different Approaches to Knowing. And it should be recording, so I will go ahead and pop out and let our panelists take over.
Hello, everyone. My name's Monique. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. And so why don't we start off with introductions? Elle, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Elle Ire. Pronouns are she, her. I write sapphic science fiction romance and sapphic paranormal romance for DSP Publications. I have 9 books in print at this time, and I'm represented by Naomi Davis at Bookends Literary.
Great. Kels?
Hi, I write under KS Murphy. My pronouns are they, them. I write queer romance under several genres, but mostly contemporary historical fiction and fantasy. I've been writing for JMS Books for a few years, and I usually write short stories and novellas, but I also do have a few full-length novels available as well.
Wonderful. And as I said, my name's Monique. My pronouns are she, her. I write mostly short fiction, science fiction, mostly about lesbian families. I really embrace that whole, write what you know kind of thing. Yeah, I have written some longer works, but nothing has been published yet. So thank you both for joining me today. So as Kristen said there at the beginning, our topic today is research versus experience, different ways of knowing. So let's start with the first question, which is, so thinking about your own work, how do you balance research and experience? Which do you favor, or do you try to find a balance between them, or does it depend? Kels, do you want to start?
For me, I definitely have to say it depends. I prefer experience, not only for me for like description wise. I love knowing, like, I've seen this, I've smelt this, I have been in here, I know what this feels like, but also just life experience. I've been through this. I know how this feels, how this emotion is. I know how it feels to be done with this problem, or having to overcome this problem. It also gives me a certain kind of confidence. I know what I'm talking about in this sense, rather than, all right, let me look up and see how other people have dealt with this. And and if something that I do, I feel more qualified to write about it, which is definitely why I prefer experience.
Okay. Elle, what about you?
I say pretty much the same. It depends. When you're writing science fiction and fantasy, research gets a little bit more muddled because you can't actually go research casting a spell or encountering an alien, but you can research things that might be a good stand-in for those, scientific experiments that go wrong, or an animal encounter that you can add a little embellishment to that would make it a bit more alien-like. Anything that's emotional or an internal experience, certainly I'm going to draw on my own. Anything that's external, I'm going to try my best to see if I can find something that will be a stand-in for whatever it is I'm trying, if I can't find the real thing. So I really enjoy doing more than I enjoy researching online or at a library, for sure.
Great. So I'm probably going to repeat this a number of times over the course of this panel, but I love research. I actually used to work in libraries before my kids were born, and I'll sort of any excuse for me to research something. I definitely functions as a bit of procrastination for me at times, that I'll, sort of go down that research rabbit hole quite a bit. I do try to balance it though. Like, I mean, I don't want to write stories that are just pure information dumps. I don't think that's really very interesting to anyone. And I think there are very few writers who can kind of pull off, that sort of extensive thing. So I find I tend to do a lot of research and then use very, very little of the actual research in the story that I write. I mean, a lot of the detail kind of shapes and informs the other things that I write, but the actual details of the research ends up being, a very small amount, that perhaps like, sort of the kernel of the story, but not the whole thing. And I do often find that I have a lot of that sort of unused research ends up trickling into stories somewhere down the road, right? Like, I went through a period of researching a lot about Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons, and I now know a lot about Enceladus so that, I can just sort of throw off a very short story based there without a lot of sort of extra research now. So, okay, so where for you does research come in your writing process? Like, do you research first and then, or only research in response to a specific need that arises? Is it that you start to outline or write or, whatever your process there is, and find that there's a specific need for information? And I think I kind of know where both of you guys are going to come with this, or do you develop the story ideas to accommodate the research you have done? Elle, do you want to go first?
Sure. I don't research until I have a need to research. For me, I need to get the words on the page, and I'm absolutely that person that if I start going off on a tangent and researching something at length, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop writing, and I'm going to go down that rabbit hole, and I'm not going to come back out. I might actually end up shifting the story if I do that. I've made that mistake a few times. So I really wait until I run up against something and ask myself, well, I don't actually know what this is. What do I do? And then I start hunting. I'm also an opportunistic researcher in that I seek out weird experiences and opportunities, and then I jump on those in the hopes that I will use them at some later date in a story. And I do that a lot. So if we get it back to that, I have a million things I could talk about there, and I don't want to dominate, but I definitely am a person who looks for the odd experience or opportunity, and then I want to go do that so I can use it.
Health?
I have to say I mostly agree. I just kind of dive in and start writing. Every time I've tried to like even outline or research beforehand, it just goes out the window. I just have to start writing. So I tend to research just when something comes up. And like most of you, everybody has said, that rabbit hole happens. And you just get sucked into it. And now, you started off like, hey, what would somebody wear during this time period? And now I'm talking about, the craters on the moon. I'm like, how the hell did I even get here? But I once had to research something about the Titanic, and it wasn't like a big deal, but I got sucked in there. I then went to a Titanic museum not long afterwards, and I was probably that annoying person who was saying things over the person, explaining things to us, because I knew all these things, and I was like, oh, I know this. And it was like, okay, that was that person that everybody was like, shut up, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, as I said, so I do a lot of my story ideas come from the research that I do, but which is sort of, I mean, sometimes it's, accidental in that, but a lot of it is a bit more intentional. I love going to art galleries and museums and stuff, and I'm, have my notebook and pen in my pocket, and I'm writing down thoughts or taking pictures of things, the whole time, and, sort of for ideas, I like sort of having that kind of a basis for a lot of the stuff that I write. I mean, a lot of it, of course, doesn't go anywhere, but there's, a lot of sort of, I don't know, like daily life sort of things. And and it'll be very sort of like, and from like bibliographies of books that I'm reading and stuff, I will go through and I will, sort of go through those. Again, that's because I used to work in libraries and I very much, like a lot of that stuff that I studied, like in school. And then I did online research for a government library in the 90s when online research was very sort of in its infancy in that. And yeah, so a lot of it I think is that. And then I will go back once I've written a story and then sort of like find those places where, despite the research like I found I've created things that I don't know the answers to, and that I don't, and that I do have to then go back and sort of figure out what would make sense from. I write a lot of near future stuff. So, like sort of initial human settlements on, say, the moon or Mars or that sort of thing. So there is a fair amount of actual science that I can draw on for that sort of stuff. I've been writing some more far future stuff lately, which I find a bit more challenging in that respect, because I've become so dependent on NASA and the other space agencies having, all of this like huge body of publicly available work to draw on, right? When you're looking at like, well, how would that work? Or, like, what could I say about this that would be realistic? So yeah. Okay, so that's the research side. So if we like go now to like looking at the experience side, when you think about writing from your experience, and both of you kind of alluded to this earlier, what does that look like? So are you thinking like feelings and emotions, character development, that sort of thing, human behavior or interaction? Like what kind of, like, is it the specific situations, or is it like sort of general sort of things? What sort of aspects? I know that's a huge question, but Kels, do you want to go?
Honestly, I think my best answer for that is all of the above. Being able, I feel like it's that idea that no matter what you do, you take a little bit of yourself and you put it in your character. You kind of can't help that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to become a caricature of yourself. But when you have those little bits of it, it's even just like the scenery, the world that you've been set in. If it's something that it's kind of there in the back of your head, it's kind of like this itch that's there, and you're able to put that in. I feel like you're always able to kind of present like a more authentic experience that your character is going through, because you've been there, you've done it before, even if you're taking this small little piece of yourself and putting it, on Mars. But it's there, and you can always say to somebody, because I've actually had people say before, oh, that wouldn't happen. And I'd be like, well, let's talk about this for a second. So it's almost like having your own way to back yourself up too.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of putting it, like that it's however unrealistic it may seem, it's not, because it comes from your own authentic experience and that sort of thing. Elle?
I think that if you're a reader of my work, you get kind of a secret insight into some of the personal experiences, in some cases, some of the things that I've experienced myself. Certainly, I will say that it does add a tiny bit of comfort when, like, I'm having a 3-week migraine and I end up hospitalized, but I could think to myself, this sucks, but someday I'm going to use this in a book. So there's some point to it. There is a positive side to this horrible pain I'm going through. When I had major surgery, when I was in college, I was just starting to write novels when I was in college. And, okay, I am utterly terrified, but now I know what my character feels like when she has to go under surgery. Those kinds of things, I think, add an authenticity for sure to the writing. And the astute reader is gonna note, oh, that one's really well described and detailed. I bet that happened to that person at some point. So if you can find a positive in it, great.
Yep.
I totally agree. So last summer, a year and a bit ago, I was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. It turns out I'm diabetic, and anyway, so I was in the ICU for a few days, and then stayed in the hospital for a bit after that. And I had that same sort of feeling where I had been unconscious, came to in the ICU. And one of those things I thought in those first couple of days was like, well, this is an experience that, like these are, like, and the specifics of like being in the hospital, because, I'd only ever been in the hospital before when my children were born, which is a very different sort of thing than when you're actually like critically ill and in the hospital. But also sort of like more sort of tangential things like, I was unconscious for a couple of days, right? I was in a coma. I don't remember that, and so like that idea of having like a gap, right? There are 3 days that are just gone, and that's a weird thing. And that's something, and I haven't written about it yet because it's still a bit new. But it's something I've been thinking about, and that, that experience is sort of, shaping the way I think about some things. And I don't know how that's gonna, come out in my writing, but I know it will at some point. Like I'm gonna, and then just now, of course, the experience of, having a chronic illness, right? That requires, taking insulin multiple times a day and measure. Yeah, Elle?
I think also that it being on an author, it gives you an excuse to do weird stuff.
Yes.
And it also gives you an excuse to push yourself to be a little braver than you might normally be. I am not an athletic person. I'm really a daredevil, but since I started pushing, I've become much more of a daredevil. I went ziplining down the fastest zip line in the Caribbean because I knew I could use this.
Yeah.
I can use this. Character would do this. I'm going to do this. And having that experience to kind of look back on, I did that thing. How cool was that? And then I went cage swimming with bats. I can't imagine wanting to do that if I didn't think I would have a use for it later, which I did, but it turned out to be a lot of fun, and it makes a great story to tell your friends. Like, I went cave swimming and there were 100 bats flying around, but I don't know if I would have done that if I didn't have that little author voice going, oh, you need to do that. You need to get in there and you need to do that. You need to know what that feels like.
Yeah. I think it can be like a really beneficial way of framing things for yourself, like, like giving you sort of like, like bravery kind of, in a way, right? And, and just being able to, sort of, I don't know, like be there in the moment and like really like absorbing everything that's going on, like I will say I ended up, my hospital stay was, I got all the things. I had 2 MRIs within a few days of each other. Because everything had been so sudden, they were, concerned as to what exactly was wrong with me. And that, it's like, it's an amazing technology. I'm very glad that we have MRIs. I never want to have one again if I can help it, but being very aware of like, like what that is like, and the noise and the experience of being in the tube and and like all of that, right? It's like, it really does give it a different context. Because I was thinking about, back to this question about the writing, from experience in a general way. And, as you said, Kels, like, I think too, like a lot of what I'm writing, like, it comes from like all of these different aspects of who I am, like all these, sort of intersectional identities that I possess. And so I'm writing, and it affects the sort of experiences that I write about, but it also affects like the sort of research and ideas that I'm interested in and how I interpret them, you know, like as a woman, you know, now like a middle-aged woman, as a parent, you know, I have 2 young adult kids, you know, as a lesbian who came out later, you know, somebody who was raised Catholic and isn't anymore, you know, like there's all these like sort of different, and they all, you know, impact the sort of characters I write, certainly, who are pretty much exclusively queer, unless very explicitly stated otherwise, and always, almost always either women or non-binary. I, you know, very rarely have male identifying characters in my book stories. And that's just, you know, what I write. And it comes from all of this sort of thing that shapes the sort of stories that I'm telling, you know, and it doesn't make it sort of, I don't know, right or wrong or anything, but that's, you know, that's just sort of coming out of all of those experiences that I've had and how, you know, sort of, yeah, how, you know, how I want to see them sort of thing, if that makes sense. Like it's just.
Yeah, I was talking about like those experiences, like, you know, being, for me, being non-binary, being feminine presenting, being a mom, and all those sorts of things. I tend to write a lot of escapism. So a lot of times, whether even if it's contemporary, I chuck sexism out and I chuck homophobia out. You know, I don't want that in my stories unless it's going to deal with that specifically. I'm not going to deal with those things because I want you to be sucked into a story that you can just enjoy, and he's not going to upset anybody. You know, I'm like, sometimes it's part of the story and you need it in there, but the other, like a lot of times with my, especially when I'm writing fantasy and in a different fantasy world or historical fiction, I can control this universe. So it doesn't matter. I can take these experiences of mine and maybe I'll use those experiences, but I won't take something that's somebody else's experience because I don't feel qualified enough to write about that. So I'm like, hey, let's make everybody here feel good about themselves, and let's put all representation in that I can, and you know, we'll have fun with that. And this way everybody can pick it up and read it and go, hey, that was escape for a little while. Like that was 20 minutes of what's going on out there? Who cares? So this I'm going to be right here for a little while.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Very much, you know, I you know, I deal with it in some stories, but I generally would prefer to write queer normative worlds. Like I just, you know, it is escapism, and it's just nice, you know, like it feels good to, you know, and not that my stories tend to be very like positive or happy or anything, because they are not, you know. They really do not tend to be upbeat or happy ending or anything like that. But the one thing they don't have is they generally don't have a lot of that sort of thing, right? You know, it's like that, you know, that sort of Star Trek post-scarcity kind of thing where it's just, sometimes that's nice, you know, and maybe it's not like super realistic that we ever get to something like that, but it's kind of nice to abide in a place like that sometimes, and you know, and sort of like allow the space to address like other issues, like personal issues or that sort of thing outside of that kind of a you know, a situation sort of thing. Yeah, so that's yeah, anyway, so that's mine. Are we good on that question? Okay. Okay, so going back to the research side of things, what's the current favorite thing that you've researched or discovered in your research? Elle, do you want to go? You have such great experience typing. No, I love that so much. Like, anyway.
I'm trying to decide which story to tell. I don't know. I have too many. I guess I'm going to go with weaponry. I write high action, really kick-ass women characters, and so weapons are a thing. They're assassins, they're soldiers, they're whatever they are, they're mercenaries. and I had never used a weapon in my life. So it became very apparent very early that I needed to get some firsthand experience. So I can't say I'm proficient at any of them, but I can say that I have, fired a 9mm. I have thrown daggers and throwing stars. I have thrown axes. I have shot a bow and arrow. I have cracked whips. All of those things. I'm the one where, most spouses give their spouse, flowers and candy for their birthday, and I get shooting lessons and love them and thought it was the best gift ever. So I can at least say, okay, I've handled a 9mm. I'm actually pretty good with a 9mm. But there, as a, somebody asks me, if somebody says, oh, well, that doesn't seem quite well. No, I did this thing. Yeah, I'm not an expert by any stretch. And I can tell you that I cannot throw an axe to save my life. So in the zombie apocalypse, I will not be going for the axe. That is not my weapon of choice. I don't have the upper body strength for axes, but my spouse is really good with axes. Anyway, that's my favorite. I love all the weapons. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, I love that. That's awesome. Kels, what about you?
Honestly, I would have to say Irish fantasy, Irish fairy tales, Irish folklore. I'm Irish myself, so digging into that sort of research, especially like pre-Christian traditions and beliefs on Ireland, always fascinated me. So if I'm writing something about magic, I'm definitely drawing inspiration from that. And I specifically I love fairies. Not Disney Tinkerbell fairies, but like those fairies that you don't want to mess with. So it's one of those things where I didn't always know that when I was younger. Fairy tales meant to me Cinderella and all Disney and all those happy little endings. And then once I started researching fairy tales, how they were originally written, and I started delving into fairies, I was like, whoa, this is fun. Like, this is so much more fun. I love the idea that there are these beings out there that we think, oh, they're so beautiful, they're so enchanting, and maybe they are, but that doesn't mean that behind those pretty faces, they're not like, yeah, we're gonna eat you if you don't say hello to me. So and things like that, they absolutely fascinate me. I actually have not published anything with fairies yet, but I do have quite a number of incomplete projects with them that I just need to get in there and finish, because I just, like I said, they are my favorite fantastical creatures. I know most people jump to dragons with that one, but for me, it's definitely fairies. The Irish lores, like I said, Irish magic, all of that it just fascinates me. And I love now that a lot of Irish citizens are actually trying to dig back into their original roots again, pre-Christianity. So there's even more information now. So a lot of that was lost, unavailable, and now it's there again. And now I can actually speak to people there with our new technology and everything. So I can speak, hey, this is what you're doing. Can you show me something about it? Can we talk about it? And it's a really great thing to be able to do, especially because it's much harder to experience something like that. But being able to talk to people about it, being able to read about it. And I've actually started just collecting books on it, even if there's no reason for me to have it. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Let me grab this. I'll probably use it eventually.
No, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, I find sometimes, before I answer the question, but I find sometimes that I do, like, I'll get really, involved in something and that sort of collecting information and that sort of thing. And it can, the sort of the more interesting it is, or the more special it feels, like the longer it can take to percolate into like the proper sort of story to use the details in, or that sort of thing. I went through a thing with thinking about writing a story about pilgrimage taking place on Mars with all of the old rovers and landers and stuff. And I thought about that for a couple of years. Like, I had the maps of where they all are on the surface. I know, like up on the wall. And I was like, I was, and anyway, but it took quite a while before that story became, before I sort of found the way into the story that I wanted to tell, and it ended up being a short story that was published by Diabolical Plots a few years ago. And it was just, it was, but it was sort of, it felt very important, like I was just like, what is the story that I'm trying to tell here? Anyway, so my answer to this question about my favorite current thing is medieval tapestries, which you might be thinking don't sound very, related to science fiction. No, they're not really. But I am finding a way. So this actually came about, and as I said before, so I like going to museums and art galleries and that sort of thing, and sort of collecting ideas. And quite fortunate for me, my daughter lives in Paris now. And last year when I went to visit her, I went to the Cluny Museum, which is a museum of medieval history and archaeology, and it's amazing. And I obviously I already had an interest in that sort of thing, but they have the Lady and the Unicorn tapestries there, and they're just absolutely stunning. I mean, they're stunning in pictures, but in like real life, standing right in front of them, I just found them like absolutely enthralling, and I loved it. In fact, when I went back to visit Maddie again this year, and I went again, just so I could stand there and, but I've done a lot of research about them. I've done a lot of thinking about them, and I like all sorts of things. I like how dense they are with imagery, right? There's, if you're not familiar with them, there's, the Lady and the Unicorn tapestries in particular are 6 tapestry, a woman in the middle and a unicorn, and then there are other animals, and the background is dense with plants. It's just this amazing, and they're very realistic looking. You can look at them, you can identify, the plants that are in them. They're just stunning, and they're woven, which is wild, but anyway, like, I mean, the whole how they are made is a whole other level of coolness to them. But, that led me into sort of thinking about other sort of elements of medieval history, and some of which I was already familiar with, but sort of thinking of those of like the churches and the stained glass, and that I went to some other places, obviously, when I was in France. And some of the, the women who lived in the time. I recently read the book Femina, which is a book about medieval history from the point of view of the, women who have been written out of it. And so now I'm working on the idea for a novel that, I'll probably do the first draft of next month for NaNoWriMo, because I can't not do that, about like a spaceship that's like a stained glass medieval church, with a crew that's like medieval nuns.
Oh.
So, I mean, I don't know how that's going to work out. That this is early days in the working out, but it's just this, I find it enthralling, and I have like all the books everywhere about, that I'm reading and stuff to get ideas for it. So yeah, anyway, as I say, I do go overboard, but okay, so like let's sort of the other side of that question, right? So as opposed to the favorite research thing, what's an experience, a specific experience that you've incorporated into your work that really sticks with you, like a particular thing that you've used in your writing? Elle, do you want to go?
I did a lot of, I'm sorry, you did say me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we love to visit supposedly haunted places. That is a lot of fun for us. We spent multiple vacations traveling up and down the East Coast, staying in bed and breakfasts and hotels and inns that are supposed to be haunted. We have visited, there's an entire town that was founded by a spiritualist community. And we spent quite a bit of time there, getting readings done and interacting with the people that live there and getting their viewpoint on the world. So those characters certainly have been tangentially referred to in my Nearly Departed series. those places will pop up sooner or later. I love haunted places. I've never personally had an encounter, because I know that question's probably coming, but the feeling of the places is for me very, very similar from place to place. Old buildings have weight to me. When I step inside an old building, it's like I can feel the pressure of time, the weight of time. It can be a courthouse or a nightclub or a theater or a very old mansion kind of building. It doesn't matter. There's a feel to a building that's over 100 years old that I don't get anywhere else. And certainly that will appear sooner or later in a book.
That sounds great. I love that. Kels?
So for me, I have one specific character. This character actually is from a trilogy that I'm actually writing with K.L. Noon. This character was injured in war, and he comes home badly injured. He's got to find a cure for it, or he's gonna, very slow die. And so he's dealing with PTSD and the fallout from all of that. I myself was not born disabled, and I am now. And it's still something that I'm dealing with, because it's something that's going to get worse and worse as I get older. So I've had to, relearn how to use my body, to know what my new limitations are. When I had my first daughter, I was still very able. There was no problems, and I would run around on the playground with her, and I would have fun. We'd go out together, have family trips. When I started getting sick was right after my second daughter was born, but it was manageable. And it wasn't until a few years ago where everything just suddenly changed. And now when my family and I want to do something, I have to figure out, like, okay, do I need to rent a wheelchair for this? Is it something that I can just use my cane for? But like I said, that's getting less and less. So with this character, there's a lot of, I guess, personal experience with that. And I resonate a lot with what he was going through, and the trauma that I have been through that led to having to deal with PTSD that I probably still going through. So there's a big part of him that resonates with me. It was a very hard thing for me to go through, and I'm still learning to accept it, but I've made so much more progress now, where I can say, no, I am disabled, these are my limitations, and even though you might not be able to see it, this is who I am. And I get a lot of stares a lot out, when I'm out places, so I can relay that through his point of view. And so that's one that it's very, very personal to me, and I think he's the first person that I've ever been able to put that into like that.
Oh, that's excellent. That sounds really, yeah. Now it's going to make my response to this seem very shallow. That was really meaningful in that. So.
Sorry.
Okay. But it's actually, so what I was thinking of here was, it's a very specific experience, like a very, like not a general sort of thing. But so when I was a little kid, my family used to go to this botanical garden regularly on the weekends, just to walk around in that. If anybody is from or knows Toronto, it's Edwards Gardens. And we used to go there like every weekend, pretty much, during, the nicer weather and that. And one weekend that we were there, so it's on the sort of edge of the Don Valley, and it's very hilly. And so there's this grass hill, heading down towards a creek. And so we used to run down the hill, and you can probably see where this is going. My sister went right into the creek and got completely soaking wet, and we had to leave. She had to bundle her up in, the picnic blanket in the car and the whole thing. And, it's a very innocuous sort of event, but for whatever reason, I love that time going to that garden, but for whatever reason, I have written versions of that story into several different works that I've done, right? there's one version in which the event repeats and the consequences, you know, become sort of increasingly dire each time it repeats. Like it wasn't this innocuous thing. It actually got worse and worse and worse. And, you know, so I've done that. And I've also done it where it was like a portal kind of thing. And it's just, and I don't know what it is about, like, I mean, I there's a whole bunch of things, but I'm not gonna bore you with my, you know, childhood traumas. But you know, I think it's in, you know, but it is just like this one incident that for whatever reason has really stuck with me. And I just have returned to it repeatedly as sort of the basis of stories. So I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things. So we have a question in the Q&A. So why don't we take that? And if anybody else has any other questions, please, you know, put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Anyway, so this question is, outside of a good internet search, what is your favorite research method or tool?
I'd have to say going to a museum. Museums are one of my favorite things to go to, especially now that we have cell phones and you can zoom in and record, and I get to kind of get to take the experience home with me as best as I can. And now I can look and relook even though I'm not there anymore. So visiting places is probably my next best favorite thing, even if it's something like just on vacation. I could be in Disney World and be like, hey, you know what? That reminds me of this. That's in my head. Let me take like 19 pictures of this facing this way, and now 20 pictures on this side of it. And meanwhile, everybody's like, can we go now? All right, fine.
That's terribly relatable. I take so many pictures of things. Elle, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say again, it's just when I travel, and I'm fortunate in that I'm a teacher, so we do get a lot of time to travel around, at least if we can afford to do it. But whenever I go to a new city, I immediately type in, you know, things to do in, and then I pick the weirdest one, whatever it might be. Or I might type in haunted things in, and whatever pops up, that's where I'm going. If I take a cruise, and we live in Florida, so we get a lot of very, very inexpensive cruise opportunities. They'll offer shore excursions. Whatever the craziest one is, that's the one I'm going to do. And I might be thinking the whole time, I'm going to die on this thing. But then I think, okay, but thousands of tourists have done this before me. I'm not going to die on this thing. And then I'm going to go do that.
Cool. Yeah. I'm actually, I would say I'm very similar on to both of those. I like to, as I've said, I like to go to museums and stuff. I like to visit places. I love to travel. And that's been nice as COVID has sort of died down a little bit, and it's become possible to do that again, you know, to some extent anyway. But yeah, and I will do the same thing where I'm Googling what places I can go and what I can see. I love just walking around in cities and stuff. Like I particularly like visiting large cities, and I'm originally from Toronto, and I like large cities, and yeah, just walking around and sort of absorbing the environment and stuff. I feel like that gives me so much to, you know, I love New York very much. I get to go sometimes for work, which I feel very grateful for, and you know, try to tack on an extra day to do that sort of thing. And the same thing with my daughter living in Paris now, and you know, which was, I know this is going to sound weird, but it was not a place I ever really thought that like I really wanted to visit in particular. My family is French Canadian, but I just don't feel a lot of attachment to it or anything. But so I did do a lot of Googling about like, places to go in Paris that you might, you know, and it was really, you know, my daughter and I went to the catacombs this past summer when I was there, which is very cool, you know, which is where they moved the bodies when the cemeteries got full, and it is just bones arranged in bones. Yeah, which is a decision somebody made to do, and now you can go and visit it. And but yeah, so I would say that. But then I think like when you're looking at, and wearing my library hat, when we're looking at specific things, like aside from the internet, and I think on the internet, yeah, there's like the division between like just a general Google search and going on to something like Google Scholar, or subscribing to specific, like I'm a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, so that I get Science Magazine every week, because I find that an invaluable tool, and I search their database of back issues all the time. So I think there's that, like, there's that sort of other side of the internet, that you can use the internet to access these more specific sort of tools. But I think also going to the physical library, they do have a lot of things that aren't necessarily available online, you can often search their database, your local library, or other libraries from other cities, depending on, doesn't have to be where you are. Search their databases, see what they have in the library. And there are a lot of things that aren't available electronically. A lot of books that are not, that you can only get hard copies of. So I think that's another element that, and then people, just contacting people, like if there's something that you're interested in, find an expert on it. And and just buy them a drink or something, and or whatever it is to make that connection, and that. So that's my so we only have 4, and yes, Dawn says worldcat.org, definitely. Oh, we do have a couple more questions, and we don't really have time. We have 4 minutes. So we can, I'm going to let you guys tell everybody where they can find you, and then we can also, discuss the, remaining questions further in the Discord channel afterwards. Elle, do you want to go first?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on, X. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm always Elle Ire on those sites. My most recent release was Harsh Reality, where you will see some interactions with weird birds and fire and weapons and all of that fun stuff that I had to go and figure out. And the 1890s, which was also fun to research as well. So that's me.
Awesome. Kels?
So you can find me at Facebook, on Instagram, and I am signing up for Blue Sky. You can just search KS Murphy author. That's always me. You can find all of my work on Amazon and JMS Books. My last few releases have been contemporary, but I also have, like I said, fantasies, a bunch of stuff there too, for anybody who wants that.
Excellent. And I am Monique Cuillerier, and I am on Twitter and Blue Sky and Mastodon and Instagram, although my Instagram is really just my daily accountability post for my running. So if you do distance running, then you can follow me there. My website is notwhereilive.ca. And my latest short story was published in Bicycles and Broomsticks, Fantastic Feminist Stories About Witches on Bikes. That came out in January. That's about a cleaner who works on the last rocket launch facility on a dying Earth. And I also have a flash piece in the upcoming queer sci-fi anthology Rise, which we will be doing readings from tomorrow. So I hope people can join us for that too. Yeah, and so thank you both very much for joining me on this. And of course, have I lost what I was going to read next? Of course I have. If there is currently an ongoing reading session that people can go and join if they want. Otherwise, we're taking a bit of a break for lunch, and we'll be back with a reading session in 1 hour and 11 minutes.
Reading from this in 1 hour.
Isn't that perfect? It could not have planned that perfectly. Awesome. So thank you both. Thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you so much.
Have a good weekend. All right.
You too. Bye.
Bye.